Okay, get ready to, seriously rethink your stance on free speech, all right? Because in this deep dive, we're going super deep into John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, and let me tell you, this book from 1859 is going to blow your mind. It's scary how relevant it still is today.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, how could Mill, writing during the Industrial Revolution, know how much pressure we'd feel to conform, how easy it is to shut down voices that don't fit the mold, even in the democracy, you know?
Right, and then there's this whole thing about his relationship with Harriet Taylor.
Mm.
I mean, talk about scandal for their time. Some people think she was the real brains behind On Liberty, at least partly.
Mill himself gives her credit, saying she shaped some of his, well, more progressive ideas, especially on women's rights. But we don't have a ton from Harriet directly, so it's hard to know for sure. Scholars are still debating it.
So it's kind of like a missing piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
But speaking of things that stand out, when I was reading On Liberty, that whole tyranny of the majority concept, whoa. Mill basically predicted cancel culture way before Twitter.
He did. It's like he could see that even when you've got a system designed to represent everyone, the majority can still end up, like, squashing minority views.
Yeah, and that pressure to conform, we feel it every day.
Yeah.
You hesitate to post something online because you're worried about backlash, right? Or you kind of go along with certain opinions even if you're not totally sure.
Exactly. Mill argued that that hesitation, that fear, it holds us back. It makes us afraid to think for ourselves. If we don't have independent thought, if we can't challenge what everyone accepts, then we get stuck, both individually and as a society.
And that takes us to what's probably Mill's biggest idea, free speech, even when it's wrong or offensive. Now, I get it. Some speech is harmful, no doubt. But Mill wasn't naive to that.
No, he wasn't. And that's what makes his argument so interesting, so strong. He knew there are limits, but he thought the solution wasn't to silence people, but to actually engage with them. You know, counter bad arguments with better ones, have real debates.
There's this really powerful line where he says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that silencing an opinion robs everyone. It robs humanity. Think about it. If we only ever hear what we already agree with, we're basically in this echo chamber. We can't learn or grow.
And Mill lays out 4 reasons why shutting down opposing views is so bad, even if those views might be wrong. The first one is, we can be wrong. You know, we're not perfect. So if we silence disagreement, what if we're silencing the truth?
Like that saying, everyone's entitled to their opinion, not their own facts, right?
Yeah.
But how do we even know what the facts are if we don't listen to different perspectives, if we're not willing to be challenged?
Right. That leads us to Mill's second reason. Even if someone's view is partly false, it might have some truth in it. So by engaging with those different ideas, we can actually improve our own understanding and get closer to the real truth.
It's not about always being right. It's about being open to the idea that you might be missing something, that there could be another way of seeing things.
Absolutely. And this openness to different viewpoints, it's how we avoid what Mill calls dead dogma, which is basically beliefs we just accept without ever really thinking about them.
It's like hearing the same phrase over and over again until it loses all its meaning. It's just words with no substance behind them anymore.
Right. And Mill's argument is that those beliefs that aren't tested, that aren't argued about, they lose their power. They become weak and ineffective.
So how do you keep your beliefs alive, so to speak? How do you avoid them becoming empty slogans?
That's where Mill's fourth reason comes in. Your beliefs actually need to be challenged to become strong. You need real debate. You need to see things from the other side and be ready to defend your own position.
So it's not just about passively holding a belief. You got to engage with it, almost fight for it, make sure it holds up against criticism.
Exactly. And to really hammer this home, Mill uses some big examples from history, like Socrates, sentenced to death because he dared to challenge the conventional wisdom of his time.
And then there's Jesus, who was seen as a total radical by the authorities. And even Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, known for being wise and just. Well, he went after Christians because their beliefs threatened the status quo.
Even the brightest minds in history have fallen into the trap of silencing dissent. It reminds us that we all have blind spots. We all need to question our assumptions, and the only way to do that is to expose ourselves to different ideas, to be willing to be wrong.
It's humbling, right, to think that even the most intelligent people have made mistakes. Makes you realize that we need different perspectives to overcome our own limitations.
Exactly. Mill's point is, if these great thinkers could be wrong, how can we be so sure we're right? How can we be certain that we've got it all figured out unless we let other viewpoints challenge us, make us think critically, and re-examine what we believe?
It's a lot to think about, isn't it? But Mill doesn't just leave us with warnings about conformity and the importance of free speech. He gives us some practical advice on how to actually cultivate this habit of challenging our own beliefs and engaging with the other side. And that's what we'll be digging into next time.
We'll be exploring how to turn those dead dogma beliefs into living beliefs and talk about specific things you can do to develop a more open, inquisitive, and intellectually vibrant mind. Stay tuned for part 2. All right, so we've been talking about how important it is to really challenge our beliefs, right? And to actually engage with those viewpoints that we don't agree with. But how do we actually do that? How do we put it into practice? Well, Mill gives us some guidance in On Liberty, where he talks about developing what he calls living beliefs.
Okay, living beliefs. I like that. But before we go further, I think it's worth defining what we mean by dead dogma versus living beliefs. I mean, we've tossed those terms around, but maybe we should unpack them a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, dead dogma, to Mill, these are beliefs that we inherit or that we just passively accept. We never really question them. We don't really understand them. They're just there.
So it's kind of like going through the motions of believing something but not really feeling it deep down.
Yeah, exactly. It's like having furniture you inherited. It's there, but
Hmm.
it doesn't really define your home. Living beliefs, on the other hand, those are the beliefs that we've actually grappled with. We have tested them, we've internalized them, they've been through the fire, so to speak, and they come out stronger. They're the beliefs that actually guide our actions, shape how we interact with the world.
Right. It's the difference between just accepting something and actually owning your convictions. But how do we get from that dead dogma to a living belief? It sounds like a pretty tough process.
Well, Mill's argument is that the key is constantly exposing our beliefs to debate, to challenging them. Now, he's not saying we should pick fights with everyone we meet, but he is saying we should actively look for opportunities to talk to people who have different views.
So get out of our echo chambers. Engage with people who disagree with us.
Exactly. It's about being willing to step outside of our comfort zones and embrace a little intellectual discomfort. Because it's when our beliefs are challenged that they can actually grow and evolve.
Okay, I see what you mean. But isn't there a risk that if we're constantly debating, we just become more entrenched in our own positions? How do we keep an open mind when things start to get, heated?
That's a good question. And Mill acknowledges that it's easy to fall into the trap of just trying to win arguments instead of actually listening and learning from others. He stresses the importance of approaching those conversations with humility, with the awareness that we could be wrong, and with the willingness to change our minds.
So it's not about being right, it's about finding the truth, wherever that may lead.
Exactly. And that means being willing to truly listen to the other side, to try to understand their point of view. Mill calls this steel manning, which is basically presenting your opponent's argument in its strongest, most charitable form.
Oh, that's interesting. Steel manning. So it's like the opposite of a straw man argument.
Exactly. And it takes a lot of effort, right? Because it's so much easier to dismiss the other side's view or to twist their words.
Right. It's much easier to just shut down the conversation.
But Mill believes that steel manning is crucial for developing strong beliefs. Because when you test your ideas against the strongest counterarguments, that's how you know they hold up. And if they don't, that's how you refine your understanding.
So it's like being your own devil's advocate, always pushing back against your own assumptions, trying to find the holes in your own logic.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And this isn't just for our big fundamental beliefs. Mill would say we should do this for everyday decisions and opinions too. Before you form a strong opinion on something, seek out different perspectives, look for counterarguments, weigh the evidence.
So it's about thinking critically and not just going with your gut reaction or taking things at face value. It's a very mindful way of thinking.
It is, and Mill believed that this constant questioning, this engagement with debate, was absolutely essential for progress, both for individuals and for society as a whole. Because societies that don't allow dissent, that discourage critical thinking, they become stagnant.
Yeah, it's like we're all just on autopilot, going through the motions, not really engaging with the world around us.
And Mill would say that's a recipe for disaster. True progress, both moral and intellectual, depends on our willingness to challenge the status quo, to question what we've been told, to embrace those different perspectives.
Now, this all sounds great in theory, but let's be real. Are we really living up to Mill's ideals in today's world? I mean, with social media and the internet, it's so easy to just surround ourselves with people who agree with us and filter out everything
It's
else.
a real challenge, that's for sure. But that's why I think Mill's work is more important now than ever. Because in an age of information overload and increasing polarization, we need to cultivate those skills.
Yeah.
Critical thinking, civil discourse, intellectual humility.
So how do we break out of those echo chambers? How do we engage with people who challenge our views? It's easy to say, be open to different perspectives, but actually doing it is a whole other thing.
You're right, it's not easy. It takes real effort. It means being intentional about the information you consume, the news you read, the books you read, the people you talk to. You can't just passively absorb what's coming at you. You have to actively seek out those alternative perspectives.
So diversify those news feeds, those reading lists, those social circles. No more echo chambers. But it's not just about the content, right? It's also about how we engage with it.
Absolutely. Mill encourages us to approach new ideas with a critical eye. Question your assumptions. Be willing to change your mind.
So don't just blindly accept what you read or hear. Actually think about it. Be critical. Reflect on it. And this applies to our everyday conversations too, right? Not just big intellectual debates.
Exactly. Mill believed every interaction, every encounter could be a learning opportunity.
So even chatting with someone who has different political views or different religious beliefs, that can be a chance to grow.
Exactly. That's what makes Mill's philosophy so powerful. It's not just these abstract principles, it's a way of living, a way of interacting with the world that can be incredibly rewarding. It's both intellectually stimulating and, honestly, it makes you a better person.
This is also fascinating. I'm really starting to rethink how I approach learning, how I have conversations, even how I think about my own beliefs. But I got to admit, it can be a little intimidating, to seek out these challenging conversations, to potentially put myself in uncomfortable situations.
I get it. It's definitely not always easy. But remember, Mill's not advocating for conflict all the time. He's talking about respectful dialogue, remembering that you might not be right, genuinely trying to understand other perspectives.
Right, so it's about approaching these conversations with curiosity, with openness, not getting defensive or feeling like you have to be right all the time.
Exactly. And Mill believed that this kind of dialogue, this willingness to engage with different views respectfully, is essential for building a more just, equitable, and intellectually vibrant society.
That's a beautiful vision, and I think that's a great place to pause for now. When we come back, I'd love to dive into the question of deeply held convictions, those beliefs that are really core to our identity and values. Should those be up for debate too? We'll tackle that and more in the final part of our deep dive.
So, we've spent all this time talking about on liberty and dead dogma, and it's got me thinking maybe it's time for like an intellectual spring cleaning.
Yeah.
Time to go through those beliefs we've been holding on to and see if they still will hold up.
Yeah, I like that. It's a good idea to take stock every now and then. Bill would
Right.
definitely agree. That kind of self-reflection, that's how we grow.
All right, so let's get a little personal here. Has there been a belief, something you held for a long time, that you've maybe started to question, or maybe even changed your mind about completely? That's a good one. I think for me, it's been this idea of human nature. I used to be a bit more, I guess, cynical. I lean towards the belief that people are mostly selfish. But after reading Mill and some other thinkers who focus on the good in people, I've started to see things differently.
Wow, so reading on liberty made you rethink something pretty fundamental about how you see humanity. That's pretty powerful stuff.
It really is. I see human nature as more complex now. I mean, we can be selfish, sure, but we're also capable of incredible kindness. Recognizing that complexity, it's made me more understanding, more empathetic in how I interact with people.
That's a perfect example of how challenging our beliefs can lead to real personal growth. And it's not about getting rid of old beliefs entirely, right? It's about refining them, adding nuance, being open to other ways of seeing things.
Exactly. Mill wouldn't want us to just become these empty vessels, changing with the wind. It's about holding on to your beliefs, but also having that humility to admit you might be wrong, that there's always more to learn.
It's about finding that balance, right? Conviction and humility. Standing strong in your values, but still being willing to learn and grow. It makes me think of that Voltaire quote, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it."
Oh, that's a classic. It really captures that spirit of tolerance and free speech that Mill was all about. But I think Mill might even go a step further. He wouldn't just defend your right to say it. He'd want to understand why you believe it.
That's a good point. Just tolerating different opinions, that's not enough. We need to actually engage with them, try to understand where they're coming from, see if we can learn something.
Yes. It's about moving beyond just tolerating to actively engaging. That's where real intellectual growth happens, when you're willing to grapple with those tough ideas, those ideas that make you uncomfortable, challenge what you thought you knew.
And at the end of the day, I think that's what Mill wanted for us when he wrote On Liberty, right? He wanted us to live more examined lives, more purposeful lives, more intellectually engaged lives. He didn't want us to be passive, just taking things in, but to be active participants in the world of ideas.
You got it. And for Mill, this wasn't just an intellectual thing, it was a moral obligation. By questioning, by challenging our biases, we become more empathetic, more understanding, better people.
It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about becoming more thoughtful, more informed, more compassionate.
Absolutely. And that's a legacy that goes way beyond On Liberty. It's a message that still resonates today just as strongly as it did back then.
Well, folks, our deep dive into On Liberty has come to an end, but we hope this is just the beginning of the conversation for you. Pick up a copy of the book if you haven't already, and take some time to challenge those deeply held beliefs. See where that intellectual journey takes you.
Remember, as Mill said, and these are powerful words, the peculiar evil of silencing the expression of an opinion is that it is robbing the human race. So let's keep those lines of communication open. Let's embrace those different perspectives and let's keep talking. What's